Okay. We're trying something a little different today. I'm going to try to record and post this later instead of going live. We'll see how it goes. So we want to kind of go back through the mind-body connection and kind of take it just another step forward. This is kind of the stuff I talk about when I teach or when I work with mental health providers, whether they're NLP or whether they're normal therapy, psychotherapy, counselors, that type of thing. So we need to understand that our chemistry or our metabolism and our emotional state are directly linked. So you can look at them as a big circle. I've seen them depicted as like an infinity symbol, yin yang, which is the yin yang is probably more apropos because it's also the way that we visualize quantum coupling or that's the quantum entanglement. So what you have to understand is, and this is a great way to explain it. So, when I say that your emotions and your metabolic function or your chemistry are intimately linked and that they are indistinguishable from each other at a certain point, we've all seen it. Like, it's one of those things that when I tell people this, when we get done with it, people are like, I knew it. So think of it this way. We've all seen this. Have you ever seen, or maybe you've been hangry, where your emotional state is radically affected by your hunger? So you have a metabolic need and you have not fulfilled that metabolic need. And so you end up getting grouchy and angry and short and pissy and all those things. And then you eat and you're back to your normal happy self. So these are things that we've seen personally. So we can see that, there are metabolic functions or times in your metabolic biochemistry world where you can directly tie them to emotional feelings. Okay. The other one that we do is, and maybe less of you have noticed this one, but you can walk into a room of like 30-year-olds and say something like Jägermeister, and a decent amount of them will go, I just got a little nauseous. So again, it's one of those things that our emotional state directly transfers to our physical state, where we hear something that's tied to a time where we maybe had a little too much and it makes us still a little nauseous. Tequila can sometimes do the same thing. Just saying the word tequila to some people. So these are things that we can kind of recognize that are there. Now, take that a step further. So if we know that our emotional state is directly tied to our biochemical state from a hangry standpoint, what we also have to understand is that the inverse is also true. So our emotional state can then dictate or alter our metabolic state. And I think that this is pretty easy to understand. When someone gets mad or happy or in love or whatever, you can see it on them. The way that they're holding themselves, the way they're carrying themselves, the way they furrow their brow, all these things happen. And there's no real, you might not even be aware of it, or you might be aware of it, but there's nothing you can do about it. Right. So, that's also a piece. And we also know that, the way we expel energy is different when we're super angry or when we're super depressed or something like that. So like people will talk about how they get hot. Like I'm steaming up. I'm super hot. Like they can feel it. Like they'll start sweating because they're so angry or they're so like uncomfortable. Right. So obviously our emotional state dictates or can alter, have a significant effect on our emotional state, can have a significant effect on our physical state. I don't think these are things that I'm telling you that you're like, oh my gosh, this is groundbreaking stuff. What we need to recognize is that if you carry that forward just a little bit more and you say, if you're always in this negative state, if you're always allowing these things to eat at you, if you're always in a bad spot, it can end up leading to physical disease, cancers, heart attacks, stroke, ulcers. These are things that we've had significant evidence of this. So this is one of the things when we talk about, getting everything in the body, everything where it's supposed to be, then one of the most important things we've got to do is work on mental state. If you're still having issues that you've had from childhood, from when you're 2 or 3, and this is the weirdest stuff. Like, a lot of times if you go and you tell somebody, this is the thing, This is the thing that's been messing me up. This is what's going on for a long, long time. You know, this is the reason. You'd go, I mean, I can understand how that caused a problem, but it's not really that big of a deal because you're an adult. Your ability to understand and comprehend and deal with emotions and deal with situations is obviously different when you're 22 or 32 than it was when you were 2. So we have a lot of this early childhood trauma that carries forward, and if we don't do the right things to remediate it, and counseling is an option, psychotherapy is an option. I prefer the NLP work, that actually working on the subconscious, where the problem actually is, where the root of the problem is, which is in the subconscious, using things like timeline therapy with NLP and stuff like that. That's my preferred method. However, however you're going to deal with those, you need to deal with those. You need to dig those things out, because if you don't dig those things out, they're seeds, and they're going to grow weeds in your garden, if you will. They're going to start messing with you in some way along the line. If you look at, there's just more evidence of this. If you look at a lot of the people who have depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolarism, those sort of things, what you will find, a lot of criminality, what you find is that if you track it back, a lot of these people, if not all of them, had what we would consider significant early childhood trauma. And so what I'm basically doing is I'm saying a lot of this early childhood trauma that was not resolved altered the actual metabolic function over time, to the point where now we have metabolic diseases. We have, weight issues. We have depression issues. We have the bipolarism. We have the schizophrenia. And this stuff is becoming more, that thinking is becoming more and more and more mainstream as the pharmaceuticals start to lose some of their luster. The idea that I'll just take a pill and everything will be okay, as we're starting to come out of that haze, out of that thinking, and start looking at other things like diet and actually working on our mental health, instead of just, here, take this pill, you'll be fine. Statistics on people who are taking pills and getting resolution for their mental stuff, it is not very good. So we're going to have to start looking at other things. Diet is obviously my diet, and working on it, talk therapy, NLP, obviously the ways that I would lean on to get these things resolved, not just covering up the symptoms and hoping people shut up and go away with pharmaceuticals. This is some of the things that we're talking about when we're looking at being healthy. This is also one of those things that I'm making the big push. We really need to start working with our younger women, our teenagers, our 20-year-olds, the women, right before they decide to get pregnant and give birth, because the emotions and the chemicals that are in the mom while she's developing the baby are going to have a significant role in how the baby is developed. I work with, and this is the cool stuff, I get to work with people from different backgrounds, my psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors and therapists and, NLP coaches and, business coaches, like everybody. I always sit down with them. I'm like, tell me your stories. Tell me the things that are cool that have happened. And one of the things that one of the NLP practitioners I was working with, they were telling me a story about how this person had significant anger issues their entire life. And when they were going through NLP work, what they found out, because one of the things that you asked during what we call timeline therapy was this before, during, or after birth? And the thing that created all the anger. And this person said before, which is weird, but okay, this happens a decent amount. And when they traced it back, what they found out was that the anger that this person received was during pregnancy, like while mom was pregnant with baby. And so this person goes back and asks the mom, they're like, was anything going on while you were pregnant? And she was like, why do you ask? And she's like, because as I went through this process, what I found out is that a lot of my anger issues somehow stemmed from when you were pregnant. And she goes, huh, is what? And it's like, well, your birth father was abusive and I hated him. And I was angry with him the entire time I was pregnant. She was like, and then we dissolved it like when you were young, and that's what happened. But she was super angry the entire time she was pregnant. And that gave this person lifetime of anger issues. So, these are the type of things that we're starting to kind of see. If you develop a child and you're guilty, if you feel a lot of guilt, if you feel a lot of shame, if you feel a lot of anger, if you feel a lot of, anxiety, if you feel like there's no one there to help you, like these emotions, these feelings are constantly going through your head. They're not just going through your head, they're going through the baby as well. Because again, these are hormonal functions, these are energetic functions, these are however you want to look at it. Like your entire being feels this. And if you're growing a new being inside of you, it's going to be affected by this as well. So, these are the things that we need to start to recognize and start to clear before we start getting pregnant with or guard against while we're pregnant. Otherwise, we're going to have issues with these kiddos that we don't know where they came from. We don't know how they're dealt with. So this is not just a clear the obvious chemical. Don't eat the poison food. Don't drink a bunch of alcohol. Don't smoke a whole bunch of cigarettes while you're pregnant. We've kind of that information's kind of gotten out. But if we don't start taking care of everybody from a mental state, from an emotional standpoint, before and during pregnancy, we're still going to be having a lot of issues with babies as they come out. And the reason that this is becoming even a bigger issue is because, if you look back, one of the things we talk about is the chemicals. And again, I'm 100%, for cleaning up the chemicals and, looking at the vaccine issue and calming that down, however we need to do that. But one of the other things we've started to do over the past 40 years, when we look at our overall physical and mental health that we haven't discussed, is we have more access to all the terrible things in the world. So the amount of fear, the amount of anger, the amount of, guilt, and all the negative emotions that our news and our social media is pumping into us on a daily basis, and inescapable function that we can't get away from, that is altering us as well. Remember, your diet is more than what goes in your mouth. It's what you consume. So it's what you read. It's what you see. It's what you hear. It's what you talk about with your friends. And when your friends are always talking about all these horrible things, whether it's the economy doing these things, or it's, this genocide in, the Middle East, or or slave trade in Africa, or, whatever things you can't deal with, you can't, affect, but are still highly negative. These things are affecting us. And so we need to start either finding a way to offlet these things, or we need to stop bringing them in. Which are both great, because this kind of goes back to the whole idea of, it's like when people have mold toxicity. People are like, how do you fix it? I'm like, well, the first thing I do is I get rid of the mold, because we don't want to continually poison ourselves while we're trying to depoison ourselves or detox ourselves. So one of the great things to do, and again, I realize how hard this is, shut off some of the news that's coming in. If you can't deal with it, maybe it's not something you need to put in your mental space. So if you can't help, the people who are in, the collapsed building, on the other side of the world, maybe that's a little bit of, trauma and fear that you don't necessarily need to deal with. So these are some of the things that we're kind of looking at, but we need to start recognizing that our emotional state is directly tied to our biochemical state or metabolic state, and thus our physical health state. The more we can start to kind of understand that these things are directly tied, the easier it's going to be for us to start working on those things. I mean, look at all the stuff we found out. Oh, microplastics are bad. And so we're going to get away from those, and, fluoride is bad. Oh, we're going to get away from that, and so we found out all these chemicals that are bad and all these chemicals that are good. And like, oh, processed foods are terrible. Eat the steaks. Like, they're great for you. Cholesterol is actually really good for you. Okay. So we've started to figure that out. And oh my gosh, look, we're getting so much healthier. Like, the diabetes is going away. Like, people are losing weight. Like, they're getting more energy. Their sex drive's coming back from eating real food. Like, they're getting healthy from eating real food. And that's 100% a fact. And we need to make sure that we keep doing that. But we also need to not lose sight of the idea that if we don't start taking care of our mental, emotional state, we're still going to have all of the metabolic issues. We're still going to have the cancers. We're still going to have the mental health issues. We're still going to have all these things, because our mental and our metabolic states are directly linked. So we need to start focusing on the whole person and start working on the emotional piece, not just the biochemical piece. So if you guys are doing great with your diet and all that type of stuff, and you're working out and your biochemistry is getting really, really good, 100% start thinking about your mental piece. Now, here's the other side of that. Fixing your diet will help your mental space tremendously. So we need to do both, but we need to recognize both are things we need to work on. So if you guys have any questions about that, reach out, find a counselor, find a therapist, reach out to the office. I've got a bunch of NLP guys we work with. NLP is my preferred way of dealing with some of this mental health stuff, at least the primary function, because I believe that, the things in, timeline therapy and working on parts and stuff like that is a much, much faster, much more, it's more effective. It's a faster, more effective more efficient treatment protocol. However, talking to people is super critical. So, if talk therapy is working for you, keep at it. But if you guys have any questions, hit us up, questions@chalmerswellness.com, or drop us a DM. Talk to you guys there. Thanks for your time.